Okay, welcome everyone. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for just a moment so that you can see who we are. Um, okay, so my name is Rachel. I am the MFamily Program Manager here at the University of Michigan. And I am here with some of my colleagues tonight to talk with you about financial aid and kind of give you an overview of financial aid at the University of Michigan, how the process works, who to contact, all of those good things. Um, I am housed in the Dean of Students office. I oversee parent and family engagement for the university, and I am also part of the critical incident response team here at the university. So I am housed in the Dean of Students. One of the things we like to start this webinar by saying is that if you have any questions, especially questions outside of financial aid or something that you're concerned about, or a question that your student has, feel free to contact the Dean of Students office and we will give you that information during the webinar towards the end. Some housekeeping issues. When we start the presentation, we have disabled the chat function, so we ask that you submit any questions to the Q&A feature using the Q&A feature on your Zoom. And then once we're done presenting, we'll take a moment to gather the questions, and then we will answer the questions the best we can during the time that we have. If we can't get to all of the questions tonight, don't worry. We will send out all of the questions and their answers to you after the webinar. So later this week or next week, you'll receive a copy of the slides. You'll receive the questions and answers. And then the recorded version is always uploaded to our YouTube channel. So you'll have all of that information after the presentation. Again, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A feature. And with that, I will hand it over to my colleagues to introduce themselves. I'll start with Saj, and then we'll go from there.
Hi, everyone. My name's Saj. I work with Rachel and Nicole in the Dean of Students office for Parent and Family Weekend, and I'm the graduate student assistant.
Hi there. My name is Monet Tiedemann, and I am an assistant director for special programs over in the Office of Financial Aid. And I'm so grateful to Rachel and Saj for inviting our office to be able to come talk to you about financial aid at Michigan. And then with that, I could probably just hop right into it for you all. Okay, great. Hold on just one moment. Great. There we go. Okay. Great. So here I am to kind of help navigate youth or help you navigate through financial aid at Michigan. I know that this can be just, it's a big topic. It can be a lot to have to wade through and figure it out. And that's why I'm so glad to be here with you today. So a couple topics that I'm going to touch on, and then like Rachel said at the end, submit your questions so that I can answer them for you if you have like general questions about financial aid at Michigan. But the things I'm going to talk about tonight are specifically like how to apply for aid. What does your student need to do? Scholarships in Michigan, how does that work? Spring and summer financial aid, because that looks a little bit different than fall and winter financial aid. Off-campus housing, because maybe your student is a first-year student and they're in the dorms, but they're looking at renting an apartment for next school year. And so how does aid work towards that? And then also thinking about loans and loan repayment. So touch on all those things for you tonight. All right, so how to apply for aid. That is very important. You can't get financial aid through our office. Excuse me, just one moment. Okay, you aren't able to get financial aid through our office if we don't have aid applications on file for your student. So what we need in order for you to be considered for financial aid is every single year that your student wants aid, they need to submit a FAFSA. And that's the application through the federal government that the student is applying for federal aid consideration. It's completed once each school year, and when you complete one for a school year, so let's say you're looking at completing the 2025-2026 FAFSA, that's going to account for your students' aid eligibility in the fall, in the winter, and the spring, summer. So like fall 25, winter 26, and spring, summer 26. We strongly recommend that continuing students get their FAFSAs in for the upcoming school year by May 1. That looks a little bit different. Like if you are a parent of a first-year student, that looks a little bit different than when they were entering at Michigan, when the deadline was March 31st. But as a continuing student, it really is that May 1 deadline. And that allows us to get your student their aid package as soon as we possibly can. Generally, for continuing students, that tends to be around sometime over the summer that they'll get their aid package for the upcoming school year. You may be familiar with the CSS profile. That's another aid application that we require that students complete to be considered for full aid consideration here at Michigan. And students only need to complete it one time, though. We ask that students do it in their entering year, and then you don't need to do that application ever again. If, let's say, for instance, you didn't complete the CSS profile in your student's entering year, that's okay. You still can and still be considered for institutional financial aid. We just ask that you complete it and then let us know that you did. But we only need it one time. This year, or this upcoming school year for the 2025-2026 financial aid applications are all based on 2023 tax information. So the FAFSA uses prior tax year information 2 years ago. So that is what the IRS is going to pull, or your information, your financial information, your tax return is going to be pulled from the IRS, and it's going to pull your 2023 tax information. So that said, since your student's aid eligibility is going to be determined using the 2023 tax year for next school year, a lot of things can happen in the years after 2023. So 2024, 2025 can look very different for families depending on personal circumstances. So if your financial situation has changed since your 2023 taxes, and your 23 taxes no longer are an accurate reflection of like what your actual situation is, we ask that you contact us. There may be ways that we can reevaluate your student's aid eligibility. And just as a caveat too, if you're thinking about that, like, oh, I know that my situation is going to be very different than my 2023 tax returns, I would ask that like we will begin doing those reevaluations for the upcoming school year kind of more over the summer. And so if this applies to you, reach out to our office kind of May and beyond, and we can walk you through what it is that we need if your financial situation has changed. Okay. Next is we have scholarships. Scholarships are a great way to help fund a student's education, and they're definitely part of financial aid. All of the financial aid that a student receives from our office, it really is need-based financial aid that's determined from your student's aid applications. The way Michigan does scholarships is that it's very specific. Our office, we don't really do a lot of merit-based scholarships, but departmental scholarships can be merit-based scholarships. So there are different ways that students can kind of put themselves out there to be considered for departmental scholarships through their particular college or school. There is a My Scholarship profile that students can fill out. It's located and Wolverine Access in the student under student business, and then they go to the student center and they'll find this My Scholarship profile. if your student fills it out, it really is just a list of different things that your student that might apply to your student. It might be where you live, what county do you live? It might call out specific career interests or extracurricular activities. So your student can go through and tick off the boxes that actually apply to them. And what that does is it puts them on the short list for consideration for any particular scholarship where they're looking for a student that meets that criteria. So it's one thing that I strongly recommend that students do. And you can update it regularly if things change. But that way they can be considered for scholarships that might apply to them. Um, and then, as I was saying, with departmental scholarships, so that's something where the different schools and colleges within the university, they consider their entering students for scholarships that they have, and they may have continuing scholarships for continuing students. And so what I would recommend to all of you, to your students, is that you reach out to your particular school or college that your student is enrolled in to determine kind of how they approach scholarship giving for their student population. It really does depend on the school or college that your student's in. And some the funding varies between school or college. So definitely reach out to them because it is specific to them. And then we always encourage students to pursue external scholarships. We recommend just using a robust search engine. They're free to use. We don't keep any kind of comprehensive list of external scholarships just because there's so many of them. We just can't keep track of them all. And really, a search engine is going to be the best way to do it. I always caution to students that you shouldn't pay to have to access any of these search engines or scholarship databases. That's something to avoid because there are so many good ones that put all of that information into students' hands without cost. And then there are local alumni clubs that also offer scholarships. And so we always encourage students to look outside of the university as well. All right. Oh, spring summer aid. It's coming up. It's spring summer. It's fast approaching with I know that's just the start of the winter term, but spring summer is just right there. And so spring summer financial aid looks a little bit different for students, just because it's a non-standard year since it's optional. And so we don't put together a financial aid package for students in the same way that we do for all students for the fall and winter. It really is something that once a student is enrolled in credits over the spring and summer term, do we put together an aid package. The big thing for students to note that in order to be eligible for financial aid from our office over the spring or summer, they need to be enrolled in at least 6 credits to be eligible for aid. And so those 6 credits can be spread out over the 16-week spring summer period. Michigan's a little fun in that they have kind of several iterations of terms during that 16-week period. There is the full 16-week spring summer term, and then there's an 8-week spring term and an 8-week summer term. And so what we are looking for to be able to determine a student's aid eligibility is what is their enrollment over the total 16-week spring summer period. So that can be 6 credits all in the spring. If they have that, they're eligible for financial aid. It can be 6 in the summer, same thing. It can also be spread between the 2, spring and summer. So like 3 in spring, 3 in summer. Whatever that kind of combination is, we're still looking for an overall total of 6 credits. It's really important. We really really make sure that students know that when they're looking at enrolling in spring summer classes. And as I said before, the FAFSA that they've filled out already for like this current school year, 24-25, that's going to what we're going to use for aid eligibility for this spring summer. And then if a student is getting any kind of private loans or Parent Plus loans that they have right now in the fall and winter, if they're looking for additional loans in the spring or summer term, that actually requires a separate application. It's not something that will carry over from their fall or winter loan applications. So just something to keep in mind. All right. Okay, we'll also talk, here's this. So students are definitely already starting to think about housing options for this next school year, the 25-26 school year. And so I thought it would be important to talk about just off-campus housing and how does that work with financial aid. So housing is, we account for housing costs, housing expenses as a part of a student's overall cost of attendance for being a student here at Michigan. So we account for a certain amount of that when we are putting together the financial aid package to account for their full cost of attendance. So when a student is in the dorms, the way financial aid works is, students have their tuition charge on their account and they have the housing charges on their account. When their financial aid pays out, when it disperses at the start of the term, the aid pays towards tuition, it pays towards the housing charges, and if there's anything remaining after that, then that gets issued to students as a refund. But that financial aid has paid towards the housing charges. When a student is off campus, they're renting an apartment, then they obviously don't have those apartment, they don't have their apartment charges, their rent on their student account. It's going to be charged by their landlord. And so when their financial aid at the start of the term pays out, their tuition charges are on their account, but they don't have housing charges. So their financial aid will pay towards their tuition. And then if there's anything remaining, the remainder of that gets refunded to students. It's then up to the student to use that refund and kind of budget it out to help them pay rent for the next 4 months. And that's how we think about it, the 4 months. So there is kind of an aid disbursement at the start of the fall term. So students get a refund kind of late August. And then there's another disbursement for the start of the winter term, where students get another refund at the start of that term, which they need to use for the next 4 months for their food and housing costs. And that is, as I'm talking about with those 4 months and 4 months. So financial aid really is only provided during the months that a student is enrolled. So without spring summer enrollment, that is just like 8 months, 4 months for the fall, 4 months for the winter term. Sometimes that's something just for students to consider when they're signing a lease and it's a 12-month lease. Unless they are enrolled in 6 credits over spring and summer, they won't have aid during that time, but they'll still have their rent. And so that's just something for students and then for you as well to keep in mind as they're looking at signing a lease, that they're signing for 12, but they're initially only going to get aid for 8 of those 12 months if they're only enrolled in fall and winter. We do have kind of, if you can see it, that little off-campus student resource worksheet, which can be a really helpful resource for students as they're thinking about budgeting their money. And that is available on our website, our finaid.umich.edu website, which is a really comprehensive website. There's a lot of information on there, but your student or you can find this worksheet under the tools and resources section. Under, I believe it's the publication kind of line item after that. But this is a helpful resource, and your student can always come into our office and we can help them with this as well if they really are thinking about budgeting out their financial aid. So another important thing for students to be thinking about, and you as well, is loan repayment. So students can view so if they've taken a federal loan at any point during their career here at Michigan, or any other secondary school, post-secondary school, they can view their loan servicer and their borrowing history by logging into their account at studentaid.gov. As you might have known, loan repayment had been paused for a long time after COVID, but then payments resumed back in October of 2023. So if a loan is out of deferment, then students need to be making payments on it. We definitely recommend that students, kind of part of the process is that students set up an account with their loan servicer. And again, they can find their loan servicer by logging into their student aid account. It's something that if a student's able to, we recommend that they consider paying the interest on their subsidized loans. There are two different kinds of loans that the federal government offers. One is a need-based subsidized loan, and that's where the federal government is essentially subsidizing the interest while a student is enrolled and taking classes. And so there really is no interest on that loan until it begins repayment. But for an unsubsidized loan, interest begins accruing on the loan once it's dispersed. And so we let students know that it's a good idea, if they are able to begin at least paying that interest. So that way it doesn't, you want to make sure that when they're graduating, then that's where they're just starting with those base loan amounts. But that is something that they can do by contacting their loan servicer after they've set up that account to be able to figure out those terms and how to do that kind of thing. There is, after students graduate, there is students will set up their repayment plans. There is a lot of information about loan repayment plans on the studentaid.gov website. It's going to detail out all the different kind of plans that the federal government offers. And actually prior to students graduating, they will go through exit counseling. It's required by the federal government. And in that exit counseling, it will explain the different repayment plans, and students will help choose their repayment plan at that time. And so there's lots more information about that on the studentaid.gov website. And that's something for students also to consider, that just additionally, if they are looking at grad school beyond their undergrad, they definitely want to keep in mind that additional borrowing may be needed for graduate school. And that's something that we talk to students about, just incurring just loan debt. It's definitely a goal of Michigan to keep students' loan debt as low as we possibly can, but that is just a reality for many students, that they have to take on loans to help cover their educational expenses. But there are lots of information on that studentaid.gov website. All right. And then, so that brings me to my formal end of my presentation, really just an overview of a couple different topics that I thought would be interesting and pertinent for you. But really, if you have questions, it can be general. If there's specific ones about your student, that's harder for me to answer in this setting. But we as an office, we are very available for students and families alike. We are available by phone. From our phones are open every weekday from 8 a.m. to 4:45 p.m. Eastern, except on Thursdays when our phone lines open at 10. We have drop-in advising for students. Students can come on in by our office and there will always be an advisor available or there to meet. That again, same hours as the phones. They're 8 to 5, Monday through Friday. Again, on Thursdays, we open at 10. We also offer Zoom advising every weekday afternoon from 1 o'clock to 4:30. And so if that's something where, you'd like to meet with an advisor, but you're in Arizona, we can definitely meet with you over Zoom. So there are a lot of different ways to contact us. You can email us. Our email address, financial.aid@umich.edu. We are just very available, and that's something we always encourage students and families to come in and ask us their questions. This is a big topic, and it's something that it's money, and money is it can be a very tricky thing to navigate. And so we are here to help you and to help your student get through and graduate from the University of Michigan.
Thank you, Monet. That was great. I'm just going to go to the next slide here and follow that up with there's also the Office of Financial Aid information and again, the Dean of Students information that I promised at the beginning of the conversation and our link to the MFamily portal if you need that as well. So again, we'll send these out so you don't have to write everything down right now, but we will give you the information after the webinar. So I am going to stop sharing my screen and we are going to take just a moment to go to the Q&A part of the webinar. So if you'll just bear with me for a second while I get to the question page. And I will ask Monet the questions and we will do our best to answer them. As I mentioned, if we don't get through all of the questions in the time that we have allotted, we will send those out. And again, you can always contact financial aid directly if you have a question that's very specific to your student or your student situation. The first question is, someone is wondering if there's anything they should know or do differently with financial aid if they have more than one student attending the university.
Oh, that's a good question. Well, so yes, I'd say make sure we know about that. The FAFSA, with the update to the FAFSA simplification, it's law passed by Congress. It kind of changed a lot about the FAFSA. One of the things that it changed was the FAFSA used to ask you about the number of students in college. It no longer does. It has as of the 24-25 school year. However, the CSS profile is something that does ask and account for the number of students you have in college. And so we want to know about that. If it's something where well, and this applies if both of your students go to Michigan or if you have two students in college, or three, however many. We want to know about that. You can email our office. Because sometimes if you filled out the profile and you only had one student in college when you filled out that profile initially, but then in subsequent years you had a second student go away to go to school, we wouldn't know about it. So email our office. We'll ask for some documentation so we can make that update to your student's aid application. And then we will see if that makes any changes to your student's aid eligibility. Yeah, good question.
Great, thank you. Okay, next question. If a student receives work study as part of their package, and they accept it in the portal, but then don't follow through to work during the semester, does this impact future eligibility or consideration for work study?
Yeah, also a good question. Uh, Short answer, no, it does not impact future eligibility for work study consideration. Truly, work study, along with kind of all the federal aid that is available to students, it's something that's considered on a year-by-year basis based on your FAFSA submission. And so that's really the big thing that will drive if your student has work study or not in future years. Um, just also, I'm just going to jump in about work study too, because I feel like work study is one of those pieces of financial aid that it's tricky because it's a little strange. Um, if your student has work study as part of their aid package, it's different in all the other kinds of financial aid because it doesn't immediately apply towards your student's account balance. Like it's not money that the student ever sees actually, unless they get a work study job and work and earn the money. And then those earnings don't get applied to the student's account to pay down the balance like the other financial aid does, but instead it's just your student gets a biweekly paycheck, and then it's up to them for how they use those earnings towards kind of their expenses. And that can just be their personal expenses, whatever they have. So it's a little bit of a different kind of financial aid. I tell students that it's a good thing to have on their aid package if they're looking to work while they're a student, while they're enrolled. Um, because what it does is it's really just a job, but it allows them to apply for any of the work study jobs that are on campus. If they don't have work study as part of their financial aid package, then they just can't apply to those work study positions. Um, so, but otherwise, it's a job and they earn money and then they can use that money how they want to. So good question about work study.
Okay, our next question asks if there are special options or things that we should do differently if we are raising grandchildren that we have either adopted or are caring for.
That's a very good question to ask. And I guess my assumption is that your grandchild is and maybe I don't know. Am I making the assumption that the grandchild is the student
Is the
here at
student.
Michigan? Okay. Yes. Um, so in that case, the student there's not really anything special to do. However, the student, when they are filling out the FAFSA, they will be considered kind of provisionally independent. And then there's going to be like some follow-up from our office to be able to kind of verify that independent status. You still will need to complete a CSS profile as kind of a guardian of the student, but the FAFSA, again, it would be that provisional independent status for your student. But that's something like if you have any questions about that, that would be something where I'd encourage you or your student to reach out to our office to kind of talk that through.
Thank you. So we have a question asking that a family's FAFSA was not received by U of M. And they're wondering if they should attempt to fill one out now for this current year or just wait until the next FAFSA is due.
Yeah, I mean, if your student is enrolled at Michigan, I would say you can still submit a FAFSA this year for the 24-25 school year. Um, really, um, Yeah, and if we receive it now, we will put together an aid package for them based on, just it will be based on their aid eligibility for the whole school year. So I would say definitely do that. If you find that you're running into some issues, there were definitely issues with the 24-25 FAFSA rollout as the Department of Education moved to kind of a new FAFSA. And it definitely caused some issues for families. And so please reach out to us if you still run into those issues so we can kind of help resolve them in however best we can.
Thank you. Our next question, does U of M financial aid increase as students become upperclassmen or have raised tuition, assuming that the family's expected contribution stays the same?
That's a very good question, and definitely a question that we get from students when they see that change from lower to upper division tuition. Because if you don't know that that's coming, the students are charged kind of two different tuition tier rates. Once they hit 55 credits towards their degree, they're charged upper division tuition. And really, the answer to that is no. Their financial aid does not change. It's kind of set. Financial aid and historically, the grant funding that we've been able to give students, it does increase from year to year. Historically speaking, I can't say for certainty if it will next year or the year after, but historically it has. But there is no specific offset for that change between upper or from lower to upper division. Students, however, as they get kind of make their way in their college career, their federal loan eligibility increases each year. So a student's entering federal loan eligibility, their entering year is $5,500 total from the federal government. Their second year, it's $6,500, and their third and beyond, it's $7,500 per year. And so that's something where there is that incremental increase. But in terms of grant funding, no, there really isn't a change.
The next question is, does financial aid also apply to study abroad programs if it's a spring summer study abroad program?
You're asking my favorite questions. Study abroad is kind of the largest program that I work with, and it makes me so happy to talk about. Because yes, students can be eligible for financial aid for study abroad programs over the spring, summer. The biggest thing for that is that I really recommend that students go on a U of M sponsored program. And really what that means is like through any of the study abroad offices that are on campus, kind of each school or college has their own study abroad office. And so each office kind of offers their own programs, their own trips. And so long as your student is going through one of those programs, they're going to be an enrolled student during the term that they're abroad. And so long as they're an enrolled U of M student, they're eligible for financial aid. Again, with that emphasis that they have to be enrolled in at least 6 credits over spring, summer to be eligible for aid. Most of the study abroad programs are at least 6 credits, so most of them on their own qualify a student for aid. If your student's considering studying abroad, they can get an aid estimate from our office. We have a dedicated study abroad financial aid email address, and it is FinAid, like FINAID.abroad@umich.edu. And so that's kind of just kind of our dedicated email address that students can ask just specific study abroad questions. But yeah, absolutely. Like I love being able to tell students that like, oh, we can help them go do this amazing experience. So, yes.
The next question is the Go Blue guarantee income limit based on both parent and student incomes? And also, is it based on gross salary or adjusted income?
That's a really good question. We're looking at the parent household AGI. So it's the adjusted gross income. And I mean, great news for the 25-26 school year is that Go Blue guarantee has been like the income and assets have been expanded from 75,000 to 125,000. So 125,000. So if your family has an AGI of $125,000 or less and assets under $125,000, and you're an in-state student, and you have a CSS profile and a FAFSA on file with us, you'll be considered for the Go Blue grant, which helps fully cover your students' tuition. And then along with that, so even outside or beyond the Go Blue guarantee and the Go Blue grant that we offer, we offer a lot of I don't know, we have a good amount of grant funding beyond that too to help cover other, the rest of a student's educational expenses. Again, all based off of your aid applications, but.
We have a question. How you mentioned letting financial aid know when the CSS profile is complete, and they're asking, how do we let you know that the CSS profile is complete?
Yeah, if it's something where you are doing it because you didn't do it before and you're doing it now for the first time after your student's entering year, you can really just send us an email and just let us know that like, hey, I've submitted this. Just because it's not when we get profiles from a student from a year after their entering year, we just don't have an automatic system in place to like add that in for consideration. So that's why if you send us an email, your student sends us an email. One really important thing when you communicate with our office, especially over email and over the phones and whatever, we're going to want to have your student's UMID because that's what we use to pull up their account. And then also as parents, we want or your students need to have added you as an authorized person on their account to allow us to talk through specifics. If you have not been added as an authorized person, we're only ever going to be able to answer general questions. So that might be a good conversation to have with your student um, to see if you've been added as an authorized person.
I'll take the next question, which is not financial aid related, but someone asked if we know when Parent and Family Weekend will be in the fall. And the answer to that is no, we do not yet know. I have heard a couple of rumors and a couple of dates, but we will likely know within the next week or two. So as soon as we do know, we will post that information in the portal. So be on the lookout for that in the next 2 weeks. So someone is asking if they are planning to estimate how much money will be available for their student to live off campus. Is there a line item on their current bill for housing and dining that they can sort of translate into what will be available when the student lives off campus, or is it just one line item currently for housing and dining together?
Yeah, that's again, a really good question. So while so if you're looking at your students' kind of cost of attendance, that breakdown of, tuition and fees and housing and meals, personal expenses, things like that, you're going to see that the base amount that we currently account for in that for all students, whether they're living in the dorms or off campus, is I think offhand, I think it's $7,664 per term. So that includes housing and food. if your student's living off campus, kind of the way that that breaks down for housing and food, is that it is, and I'm speaking for 24-25. This is the 24-25 costs. Generally, each year, those costs increase with the cost of living. But for this year, we budget $1,146 a month for rent and utilities. So that's what we are accounting for in terms of the housing costs per month. So that's kind of like a good number to keep in mind. Housing varies so wildly in Ann Arbor. There is housing that students can find housing cheaper than that 1146, but then there's housing that's just wildly more expensive than that as well. But 1146 this year is what we account for housing each month. And what a student can do. So we give like initial aid packages with using that kind of that base number as a student's housing and meals cost, that 76.64. But if a student's living off, and that's what we build your student's aid package using, is that kind of that overall cost of attendance with that number. But if your student is living off campus and their rent is considerably more or any bit more than our base amount, come October 1 of each school year, students can do budget adjustments where if they provide our office with a copy of their lease, a month's worth of utility bills, like we'll take a look to see if we increase their cost of attendance to reflect what they actually are paying for their housing. We do not increase their financial aid. We do not give them more grant funding because they, have a more expensive housing situation. But what it does do by us increasing their budget is it opens up room for, additional loan funding or outside scholarships or things like that. And so sometimes students can find that really helpful to do those budget adjustments. And again, we do them starting in October of each school year. Long answer to your question.
That's great.
Okay.
So I'm just going through these here. If someone needs to make a change, and I think you've answered this, but if someone needs to make a change, like for example, their income changes, or there was a mistake in their CSS profile, or they completed it incorrectly, what should they do and how should they go about contacting financial aid?
Yeah. So in those instances, you'll find that like once your aid applications have kind of like you sent them off, you really aren't able to go in and make those corrections. Like if there was an error, you just inputted a wrong number. Really, like once we get the aid applications, for us to be able to make any changes, some kind of documentation. So if it's a correction to your tax return, we'd want a copy of your tax return. If it's, you transpose some numbers, we're going to need some kind of documentation to make that correction. So if it's something where it's like a error for like this year, we can do that now. And what I would say is reach out to our office, kind of explain what you think, where you think a correction might need to be made. And we can let you know what kind of documentation we need to make those corrections. If it's for the future, like let's say you submit a FAFSA, you've submitted your 25-26 FAFSA already. For that, we really aren't going to be able to do those corrections until later in the summer. And so, you can reach out to us then. And again, we'll walk you through what documentation we need in order to make the corrections. If it is one of those instances, and it's not really a correction, but it's just that like, oh, like it pulled in my IRS data from 23, but that's not what my situation is anymore. That's where just reach out to us. And we will talk through the process of how we can update things to reflect your current situation. So definitely just reach out to us. We'll have that conversation with you.
Okay, and I think we have time for one more question. It's sort of a two-part question. So the question is, if my student moves and lives with family and they are from out of state but moved to Michigan, when does that in-state tuition apply? And then also, do students who are out of state have access to financial aid? And can they get financial aid even if they're out of state?
Okay, good. I'm going to answer the second part of that question first. So yeah, absolutely. There's definitely aid out there for out-of-state students. Really, again, those aid applications, the FAFSA, the CSS profile, they're really key for us to be able to consider your student for aid. The difference, so as a public state university, we have a commitment to kind of meet the full need for our in-state students. We unfortunately aren't able to do that for our out-of-state students in the same way. So while we do, and we do, I think for a public university, I think we have a lot of grant funding that we can offer out-of-state students. Um, but I find just in most cases for students, there's still a gap between the funding that our office gives and and the cost of attendance, and then your kind of contribution as well. Um, yeah, unfortunately, just that's just the case of it. But there's definitely financial aid. So if get those aid applications in if you haven't already, so that way your out-of-state student can be considered for aid. To speak to the residency piece, so that's kind of a different thing, and really, I can't speak to residency a whole lot. It's a different office that handles those kinds of considerations. It's the Office of the Registrar has a residency office that students can appeal for in-state residency. Um, I really recommend there's a pretty in-depth website that or webpage by the Office of the Registrar that details out what's needed or the kind of requirements for in-state residency. They're pretty strict. And so look at those. That's going to probably be the best first source. Thank you, Rachel. So definitely that ro.umich.edu, start there. There's a residency tab. Look at all those requirements. And then, if you meet those requirements, your student can apply for in-state residency. But I do not pretend to or can even really speak to any of that process or all of that. Definitely reach out to the Office of the Registrar if you have specific questions there.
Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate everyone's time. Like I said, we're coming to the end of our time allotment here tonight. I've put a couple of links in the chat, and I'm also putting the Dean of Students office information in there. Again, we will be sending out the slides, the Q&As, and you can always find the recorded conversations on the MFamily YouTube channel. But in case you have a question or you think of a question at 3 in the morning, like I do, there's the information, and you can always email if you have any more questions. So we thank you for your time tonight and hope you have a wonderful afternoon or evening, depending on where you are in the country. Thank you.
Thanks so much for having me.